All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started because your time is valuable and we want to move you on. If you're just coming in, there's a swipe box out there. You can do it after on your way out if you didn't have a chance. You should each have a handout and a little zippered pouch. So welcome. This is the Summer Study Abroad Orientation. My name is Dr. Tracy Williams, and I'm the person behind the scenes a lot of times that sends you emails and reminders and gets to be a part of your experience vicariously. I am so excited for all of you. I have been in this job for 15 years, and I say all the time I think I have the best job in the world because to me there's nothing more exciting and gratifying than having students have the opportunity to travel and study abroad and have these eye-opening experiences of seeing things firsthand, of challenging themselves, and moving outside their comfort zone. And I'm just so pleased that you've taken on the challenge, that you are equally excited about this, and I'm sure very excited to go. Despite the fact this is a big group, I do really want to make this more of a conversation and involve you, mostly because I've built my career on stating that the best learning comes when you experience things, not when you're talked at. And so I'm really going to try hard to involve you in this conversation and include you in this and help you really take away some valuable tips and lessons to keep you having a great experience, keep you safe, healthy, and really enjoying the experience. So indeed, our goals for you are for you to have a experience where you walk away with a better understanding of the world, with more openness, with more flexibility, with more curiosity and more awareness, self-skills, confidence, all those sorts of things. It's amazing what you will accomplish and do in just a few weeks abroad. And so you're really up for a great experience. And as I said earlier, I'm excited to be along and part of the journey with you. I have a couple of guests that will be with me here today, and as I said earlier, we'll move this along and try and get you out in 50 minutes or an hour. What I want to point out is that you have a handout and this little zippered pouch, and we'll reference this a couple of times. If you didn't get one, you can slip out now and grab one. What I want to talk about first and have a conversation about first is that I assume and hope that most of you are going on this experience because you want to see new things, different things, experience other cultures, and really have that open mind to what it's like to live in another culture. And we also know at the same time that cultural learning is one of the most difficult things because our own culture is so ingrained in us that we don't really recognize what our biases are and what our constraints are and what kinds of things prevent us from being really open-minded. And so on this handout, I've given you lots of ideas and tips for cultural learning and for really being a part, really taking advantage of the experience of exploring, being curious, being open-minded, and things like that. So I hope that you take some of these ideas and these quotes to heart and really think about what it means to go abroad, not just to see different things, but to see things differently. In your pouch, you have a card that's called Change Your Lens. You also have it listed here. And this is an app that I've designed that you can download onto your smartphones that takes you through how you process and learn about cultural experiences in the moment when you have that moment of frustration. So I hope you'll take the time to download that app and think about how to deal with cultural moments using that app. But just to get us started, I want to ask you, what would you do? This is a what would you do kind of moment. You get abroad, you realize that your apartment has no air conditioning, it's hot, it's sweaty, it's cramped, you don't have enough space in there, and you have to walk 3 flights of stairs up to get to your apartment. So this is, right now, sitting in your comfortable place, sounds maybe kind of adventurous, or maybe kind of sounds like, I can deal with that. But in the moment that you're there, this is going to be frustrating at times. This is going to be irritating. So what would you do? talk to each other real quick and think about what you would do in that sort of scenario to deal with cultural frustrations of no air conditioning, hot and cramped apartments that you have to walk up to. All right, what do you think? Any hands raised on what you're going to do or how you're going to feel? Oh, no, everyone's shy. Tell me what you talked about at your table. Yes, thank you. Deal with it. Okay, yeah, right? I mean, I'm not trying to sound sophomoric to you, but yeah, I mean, this is the adventure you've signed up for. You have signed up to go to a different place where things are going to be different. And so you're not going to know ahead of time what exactly is going to be different. That's part of the joy and part of the adventure and part of the learning experience. But it's going to be something that surprises you. Maybe it's going to be the fact that the eggs aren't refrigerated and you can't believe that. And you think you're going to get sick every time you eat an egg, even though that's a perfectly fine cultural practice. Or maybe it's the fact that there's no air conditioning and you're hot all the time. Or maybe it's the fact that no one ever says I'm sorry when they bump into you. I can't predict what kind of thing is going to be annoying and frustrating to you, but what I ask is that when you have that moment that you step back and say, this is that time that Dr. Williams told me about. I'm going to have a cultural frustration with the local environment, and I chose this and I'm going to figure out a way to adapt to it. So I do hope that you take the opportunities to talk to locals, to learn about the culture, to embrace those differences and quote unquote deal with them, as well as embrace them really and learn ways to enjoy them, because that is part of why you're going abroad. It's your responsibility as a TCU student to be flexible and to be open and engaged. And I just have to tell you, we hear again and again from our partners abroad how wonderful TCU students are at this. The TCU students are gracious, they're adaptable, they're flexible, they are appreciative. And so I just say sort of to you in advance, thank you for doing that, for being that type of student abroad. And I hope that it is, as I said, a learning moment for you to see those kinds of things. The next thing that I want to talk about is alcohol. This is our biggest concern for students abroad. I know you've heard some of this already in the orientation videos that you did with your online application, but it's worth repeating because it's just really important to us. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tiara, who is from the Alcohol and Drug Education Office. So we'll do a quick mic switch, and that will, that's on too. Yeah, I think so. Okay. All right, we'll see.
He said there. Okay. Move it. All right. Does that everyone hear me? Does it carry to the back? All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, my name is Tiara, and I work with Alcohol and Drug Education here at TCU. Specifically, I work with educating students on how to make healthy, low-risk decisions in regards to alcohol and other drugs, with the goal of empowering you guys to be able to make the best possible decisions for yourself in order that you might have the best possible outcome, both here at TCU and in the future to come. I know that all of you want to have the best possible experience abroad, so we're going to talk a little bit about some information that can help you achieve that. So before I get into any specifics, I'm curious, raise your hand if you are not from Texas. That's a good number of you. Okay, hands down. Will you raise your hands again if you're not only not from Texas, but also not from the South? All right, still a good number of you guys. So from you guys that just raised your hands just now, if you'll do me a favor and shout out Something that really surprised you when you got to Texas. Something, our laws are probably pretty similar to where you're from because we all live in the same country. But what are maybe some different cultural practices or the way people say things that really surprised you and took some adjusting when you got here? No idea what fixin' to meant. All right, that's a good one. What's another one? Anybody else? I know there was more.
Everyone's a lot nicer.
Everyone's a lot nicer. Okay, I heard one in the back. Big t-shirts. Yeah, I can see that. One of my good friends is from Delaware, and they were shocked that people wear cowboy boots and shorts. They thought that was a really big fashion faux pas. I've also heard people surprised at how many trucks you see in Texas. I've also heard people surprised that we don't ride horses everywhere. You're both sides of the spectrum. Surprised that cowboy hats aren't just a costume. All sorts of things. Some of them kind of crazy, some of them maybe not so much. But if there's that kind of cultural difference from just a few states away in our own country, and things can be perceived so differently just a few states away, think about how much more so that can be when you are across an ocean. So with that in mind, we'll talk about a few of those. As you adjust to new surroundings and the country that you go to, you'll probably be tempted to maybe slip into alcohol misuse or abuse, or and I say slip into because it can happen really, really easily without even intending for it to happen. We're going to talk about some of that, some tips to help prevent that. But first, I want to read out a couple statements that we hear a lot from students. It's things that they perceive to be truth, but they may or may not be. A lot of times we have a preconceived notion of what everyone else is doing or what a place is going to be like, and that may or may not actually play out. So I'm going to read a statement, and if you think it's true, I want you to raise your hand. All right? So the first one is that drinking is part of the culture. If you think that that's probably true in the country that you're going to, raise your hand. All right, it's probably about a third of you. There's probably a good chance if you're going somewhere in Western Europe that that statement has some truth to it. Many countries over there are big proponents of social drinking. They start drinking earlier in the day than we're probably accustomed to here, and wine is probably a fairly normal thing to see with them at dinner. But that's just what you see on the surface. You have to think a little bit deeper about it. Just because they start a little earlier in the day doesn't mean that they're drinking excessively by any means. Europeans tend to sip one drink a little bit slower and actually drink less than we would over here. So if you're thinking that all-out party starts at 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock or whenever you might see somebody sitting down at a cafe, that's probably not the case. So it's good to be aware not only if they are drinking, but really the style and manner of which that they are. Just because many people leisurely have an alcoholic beverage or two does not in any way suggest that you would need to do that to be able to fully experience that country or that region. Like we mentioned earlier, the main reason that you're there is to observe and experience new culture and to learn many things. Alcohol can, perhaps if you are over 21 and being responsible, be an enhancement or an additional experience that you have over there, but by no means should it be the focus or the thing that we revolve around. And I think that if you set that those standards for yourself ahead of time, it's going to be a lot easier to follow through. And I know that with the group that we have here, that those choices will be respected. So just because drinking might be part of the culture does not mean that we have to engage in it. So second myth or fact is Other countries are more lenient when it comes to drinking and drugs. Other countries are lenient when it comes to drinking and or drugs. How many people think that's probably true for the country that you're going to? Anybody? I see one or two timid hands. This is probably not true, so you guys are probably very right. Although it may appear that drinking might be very socially acceptable in your host country, the customs regarding alcohol use can still be really different from our own. And just because they have a couple drinks does not mean that public intoxication is something that is acceptable by any means. In fact, in most of these countries, there are much stricter laws for public intoxication and any type of drug paraphernalia or drug use. I don't think that any of you guys probably want to add a night in jail or fines to your study abroad experience. Certainly was not on my bucket list when I was a student. And some countries can actually have some really crazy penalties for these things. You could end up, depending on what the offense was, with a year of jail time without bail. There's actually some countries that sentence hard labor, which is probably definitely not what you're looking for on your study abroad experience. So you have to realize that the laws and the repercussions of negative choices can be very different from what you would expect here. And also, not knowing the law in the country that you're in is not an excuse when you do break it. So while I would encourage all of you to familiarize yourself with the customs and what is socially acceptable, as well as what is legal or not legal, just know that they're probably not going to let you off just because you didn't know that that was not allowed. So the last one is alcohol is different in other countries. How many think that that statement is true? Alcohol is different in other countries. Couple hands. This one's actually pretty true in a lot of regards, and I'll tell you why that is. All drinks are not created equal, even here in the United States. A drink is not one glass. A drink has to do with the amount of alcohol in the beverage you're consuming. So a standard drink here in the United States would be 12 ounces if you're talking about a beer. It would be 5 ounces if you're talking about a glass of wine, or 1.25 ounces of any 80 proof liquor. That's a standard drink here in the US. So if you picked up a Corona or a Coors Light or any beer like that, it probably has anywhere between a 4 and 5% alcohol content. A lot of European countries, as well as Australia and New Zealand and a few others, their standard beers actually contain more like 10% alcohol. So if you didn't know that and you went in thinking you were just going to have one, you would actually be consuming two. So that's very important to know. Should you choose to actually have a drink, it's really important to know what's in it so you can adjust and know how much is actually in your body. That's also really important in a foreign country because most likely you're going to be using public transportation to get around. You're probably not going to be super familiar with where you are in the different streets and the routes. There's also going to be a lot of people around that you've never met before, so there's just a lot more opportunity for risks and things to happen. Even one drink clouds your judgment a little bit. You may not feel it as strongly, but it still is affecting the way your brain operates. And so should you choose to have one, it's really important to know what's in it and also to have a very clear plan on getting back to the place that you're staying. It's really important to always have a friend with you. It's important too, to just like it is at any party or restaurant here, to always keep an eye on your glass. Never set it down somewhere, go off to the bathroom, or go out on the dance floor. Anything like that, you never know what someone could slip in that cup. It's also really important to watch the bartender. If you ordered a mixed drink, to watch the bartender to see what he adds there. Unfortunately, just like here, it's just as possible for them to slip something into your drink. And that's just not an experience that anyone wants to have, period, no matter whether you're here or abroad. It's also important to know how alcohol would get out of your system if you're going to choose to drink. A lot of people think that maybe a little bit of coffee or an energy drink or a lot of water, a cold shower, a nap, any of those things can help you sober up. 100% of those things are myths. The only thing that can sober you up is time. Your body only gets rid of half of an ounce of alcohol per hour. So this means that a standard drink probably takes anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes. And if you've had more than one, it's going to back up in your system and take a lot longer. So those are the things to be cognizant of should you go out and choose to drink. I know that you've all reviewed the policy that TCU has for study abroad, and so you know that in Texas the legal age for drinking is 21 and that you're held to that same standard when you're overseas, even though the drinking age might be lower in different countries. A lot of people think that if it's okay over there and they're doing all right, that we should have that same law here. What they don't know is that there's actually a lot of studies that have been done on the health of Europeans that show that that younger age of alcohol consumption has actually affected their health a lot by the time they get to their 40s and 50s. All sorts of different things, anywhere from brain development to stomach and liver functions. So we're not going to go into that a whole lot now, but there's actually really good reason why our drinking age is what it is. And that is a standard that you're still held to over there. It's also of note, maybe, to realize that even though here there's one drinking age, once you're 21, you can drink any kind of alcohol you want. That's not true in most European countries. A lot of them have one age for beer and then another age for liquor. So just because you fell into the category to be able to legally drink beer in a country does not mean that you're old enough to drink the liquor. So that could unintentionally get you into problems too, if that were to come up. So make sure that no matter where you go, you familiarize yourself with all of those laws so that you can protect yourself from being at risk for any of that. So a couple other tips that we have. Men and women process alcohol differently. So if you were going to choose to drink overseas, you would want to be aware of that. It's a very dangerous thing for a girl to try to keep pace with a guy. That has nothing to do with stamina or anything like that. It is simply biological. Women's bodies process alcohol very differently. We have less of the enzyme in our stomachs that break down alcohol, and our bodies also have more water in them, which helps keep that in the system longer. So just know how to space that out and be familiar with how your BAC works. It's also important to know that even as we create perceived stereotypes of people in other countries and people in other places, they do the same exact thing for us. I had the chance to go to Singapore and Malaysia between my freshman and sophomore year, and I experienced this quite a bit. All that they had seen of America and Americans were things that they had seen on TV shows and movies and in ads. Think like Desperate Housewives and Abercrombie advertisements and things like that. And a lot of them actually really perceived American women as being pretty lewd and promiscuous. So You have to also be very aware of how others might be perceiving you and how that might affect their treatment. If men in Europe happen to think that about American women and you've had a couple and are being a little bit flirty and maybe wearing something perfectly normal here, but something that might not be considered maybe quite as modest in another country, you could really be putting yourself at high risk for a negative situation. Sexual assault is something that's really hard for authorities to work through, even here in the US. It's even harder when there's alcohol involved, and it's way harder when it's in another country. So that's just an experience that we want to make sure that we protect from as much as possible. And again, being aware of how others might be perceiving that and holding really strong to that buddy system is what is going to be your best protection there. Never leave a friend behind, never leave a bar, even just to go outside to make a phone call or anything like that by yourself. Make sure that you're always looking out for your friends. And for guys, there's some negative stereotypes on you too, unfortunately. Possibly a lot of countries kind of view American men as a little bit more rowdy, or maybe cowboy-ish. Being from Texas, I could certainly see that happening. When I was overseas, a lot of people could not name one state in America except for Texas. We just have a reputation that precedes us everywhere we go. So this stereotype could be applied to you. This could get you into trouble if, say, you happen to be at a bar and maybe have not even had anything yourself, but a fight breaks out and you get in the middle to try to break it up, or maybe you have had a couple and stumble and knock someone over. Law enforcement over there might have this stereotype of you as a little bit more of a rowdy or troublemaker type, and that could put you at a higher risk as well. So just another reason to be sure that we are above the line in terms of conduct and behavior, and keeping our decisions wise. Finally, alcohol poisoning can happen overseas just as easily as it does here. Alcohol poisoning happens as a result of binge drinking when too much alcohol gets in your system. Alcohol is a nervous system depressant, so the more alcohol that is in your bloodstream, the more your central nervous system shuts down and gets slower and slower. If you were to suspect or be worried that a roommate or a fellow student of yours could be at risk for alcohol poisoning, you would absolutely want to contact help as soon as possible. Whatever country you're in, you should be given resources for how to get emergency medical attention. You would want to call them right away. Alcohol poisoning is very serious. The only way that we can possibly help someone is by pumping the stomach to remove any alcohol that might be in there to keep it from secreting into the bloodstream and raising that BAC level. So it's important that if you feel that they are at risk, they get help as quick as possible. Some signs of alcohol poisoning could be really slow breathing. They might have passed out and you can't wake them up. They might also have vomited, perhaps even if they're passed out. Their skin could be a little bit blue and clammy. Those are all signs that you should probably seek some assistance. And finally, I want to touch just very briefly on other drugs as well. Like we mentioned earlier with alcohol, different countries have really different consequences and penalties for paraphernalia, for possession, for use than we do here in the United States. Possession of even an ounce or a pipe can get you in big trouble if law enforcement was to see it. So let's just leave all of those things at home, not pick any up over there, not accept any package from a stranger, even if they ask you to carry it down the street, anything like that, even for reward. All of that can get you in major legal trouble. And as far as prescription drugs go, this is also a subject that can be a little bit tricky. So there's two things to say about that. First of all, if you do regularly take a medication that's prescribed to you by a doctor, make sure that you have that medication before you leave. It can be really hard to get it wherever you are going, depending on what it is. It could also be a lot more expensive than it is here. So you want to make sure that you're prepared and can stay healthy. But secondly, I would make sure that at all times you have that on you, and as well as a letter or the actual prescription from your doctor. That way, if ever questioned about it, you can show that it is actually for medical purposes and was prescribed by a doctor and is legal. You are representing yourself and your family and TCU, as well as the whole United States of America overseas. And that is a huge privilege and one that I hope you guys steward well. So I think Dr. Cousins is going to talk a little bit more about that. But before I leave, are there any questions that anyone has about alcohol in general, about other countries, drug use, anything? I will also say that mixing substances is extremely dangerous as well. Even just alcohol and caffeine can have some really disastrous effects. So just be very aware too that just because you had maybe a drink at dinner, you will also need to be a little bit more mindful of anything else, and that includes prescription medication. Anything else? All right.
Thank you. All right, now we'll have Dr. David Cousins speak to you a little bit about conduct abroad and TCU's expectations. Thank you.
Ouch, what a dumb subject. And what a boring subject, and a big old white male to talk to you about it. What do you think about that, guys? I'm gonna take a little different angle. I had the opportunity to visit some folks in Italy, some of our students in Italy in last October, and I did a little qualitative research. But I'm going to ask you some questions that I asked them, and get some ideas about what you think, and then I'll tell you what the results were from their perspective, having they'd been at a study abroad experience for 2 months. They were halfway through their experience. First, though, it's really exciting. You're going to get to take some time off to go to another country and experience that culture, and I'm guessing you're looking forward to it, and I'm guessing you're really excited about it. So the question I have, the first question is, as you think about going next fall, wherever you're going, what is the one thing, and you might write this up in the upper left-hand corner of that handout, what's the one thing you are looking forward to? Just pick one. There's probably a list. We won't have time for the list, but what's one thing that you are excited about, interested in, happening as a function of that experience? Think about it for a second and jot it down. There's a method to my madness. What is there one thing that you want to happen you're excited about? Humor me. Write it down. Okay, second question. What are you concerned about? What is there about this experience you're looking to? Now, I hope you're all optimistic and it's all going to be great and good, but I'm guessing with these conversations we're having with you and all these handouts and your parents and other folks, there's a possible downside to any experience, right? Especially one as powerful as a study abroad. So what's one thing that concerns you about this experience? What's one thing that you're challenged by or you're thinking about? Write that down. Or at least in your head. Think about it. Anybody willing to just offer that first one thing you're excited about? Yes. Food. Fantastic. A second one. I mean, not the second question, but the second one you're excited about. Food. Culture. Okay? Now, on the challenge side, what are you concerned about? What are you worried about? What are you thinking about that could go not as well as you'd like? Yes? Say it again.
Sickness, like disease.
Getting sick. Yes? Language barrier.
Terrorism.
Say it again.
Terrorism.
Terrorism. Yeah, that was on your mind too, right? Yeah, yeah. And we have no students in Brussels right now, I'm happy to say, and we concern ourselves with that. So they aren't in harm's way there, but the world can be a scary place. Life is a scary place in some ways. Let me share with you some of the data I gathered from, I talked to about 35 students in Italy, and we had a good conversation in small groups. And the answer to the first question, the question was, what do you like most about your experience? And I picked some of these things out, and they said, new culture, fresh perspective, the adventure, food, all the things that you've already mentioned. When I asked them the second question, they said, and the question was, what is most challenging about this year you're spending here? And again, they'd spent all, end of August, all of September, and most of October in a different culture, a different country. They said, everything is different, one person said. Seeing things through other people's eyes, dealing with stress, culture shock. Now, what I find interesting about this, and I'm kind of a nerd this way, so I find things interesting in all kinds of things, but the positives and the negatives are different sides of the same coin. Because when you experience something as different you're going to experience, how many of you like to ride a roller coaster, like roller coasters? How many of you hate roller coasters? Did you know that when you wire people up, literally, to measure their body processes and their brain and etc., the people who hate roller coasters and the people who love roller coasters show the same thing on the screen. The same thing on the screen is for the excitement and fear. Basically, the central nervous system looks the same whether you're excited or whether you're scared. Isn't that interesting? So it's a function of how you experience that experience. That's not to say you're all going to just all of a sudden decide to ride roller coasters, you know you hate them. But there's something about how we think about the experience and what we do differently that helps us respond differently to it. So basically the answer to the question is, what are you most excited about? Culture. What are you most scared about? Culture. It's basically what happened. And then I asked the third question. I won't bug you with this one. I said, okay, of those two things, how much responsibility do you have in affecting that, both the good and the bad? Does that make sense? On a 10-point scale. If it's a 9, you think 90% of it you're in charge of. If it's a 2, you're only 2%, 20%. The average of all those numbers, when I added them up, was an 8. The students said, for the most part, they were responsible for their response to the good stuff and the not so good stuff. That's pretty cool. And I'm guessing this room is no different. This notion of how you experience something that's stressful is something that you're learning as we speak. And I guarantee you, one guarantee I can give you, next semester is going to be stressful. I am absolutely sure of it, and I hope it is. I hope it's a really stressful time. Isn't that the damnedest thing for me to say? Because the more stressful it is, and the more ability you manage that stress, the more self-efficacy and the more resilient you'll become. We know that. Data's tons of data out there that says that. So it's important that you go into this expecting all kinds of exciting things and all kinds of challenging, stressful things, and also go into it knowing what you can do with that. So I'm going to give you a few tips that might be helpful, may not be, but I'm going to hope they're helpful. The first tip is the 24-hour rule. Have you ever heard of the 24-hour rule? That's when your life is about ready to explode, you think. It's going in the dumper. You can't stand it. You are just about ready to explode. And you want to call for help, call mom, dad, somebody else. Unless it's life-threatening, wait 24 hours to call. Why would I say that? Anybody have any idea why I'd say that's a possible good idea? Sir? And we know that most of us are on an emotional roller coaster, especially in a different environment. Remember what it felt like your first week here, even though TCU is like Shangri-La, isn't it, right? It's like the coolest place on the planet. But we know that 50% of the students who come to TCU, or any university, by the way, but TCU, have homesickness, a really bad case of homesickness the first 5 weeks. So even though it's a great place, they feel concerned, like they're not going to fit in, they get upset, and they get lonely, etc. If they immediately call home, that will delay how they respond. I'm not saying people shouldn't call home. I'm not saying that. But how you manage it yourself is important. So the 24-hour rule is something you might consider. It's also going to be hard to call home when you're in Guatemala and Florence and Barcelona. It's going to be harder. It's not going to be difficult. It's not going to be out of the question. But it's really going to be important that you see the opportunity as trying to manage the annoyances, the frustration, because I guarantee you they're coming. They have less stuff than we've got. I don't care where you're going. There is less stuff, there's less Wi-Fi, there's less everything that we're used to. So it's going to be frustrating and annoying, and how you manage that is going to be important. So how do you do that? Does the 24-hour work at least work for you intellectually? Does that make sense? 24-hour rule? Now, if you've got the plague, do not wait 24 hours, okay? If your friend is, squirting blood out of his neck, bad idea to wait 24 hours, okay? I'm being facetious now. So you know what that looks like. The urgency is important that you call somebody, probably on site, probably not home. Another couple of tips that might be helpful to you, and I'm going to refer to one of the greatest books ever written, and it's a little dinky book called Choosing Civility. I would recommend it highly. And I've had this book. It was written in 2004, and periodically I access it. There's a bunch of really good tips in here. I'm going to only share a couple with you. The first tip is in terms of how you might manage and find that self-efficacy is pay attention. Pay attention. Pay attention to the environment. Pay attention to yourself. Pay attention to what's going on with you, and figure out how you're going to manage it differently than you're used to. That's easier said than done, by the way. That's called mindfulness, and we're not really good at mindfulness because most of us have one of these devices handy. I've got mine in my pocket. You may see one of these? Yeah. Some of you have seen it right now because you're under the table with it. These things keep us from being mindful because they're constantly squawking at us in some way, shape, or form. So paying attention to this cultural shift is absolutely crucial. The second tip that this author talks about that I think is really important for you to consider is be a considerate guest. And sometimes we forget that, even in our country. But it's really important that you remember that over there. Be a considerate guest. That means you leave stuff the way you found, or if not better, etc. You kind of know what that means. Intellectually, you know what that means, but it's really important. And I think some of the handouts I was looking at that you've been given was reminding you of that, the consideration. So I was supposed to talk about conduct, right? That's what I'm talking about. Do you know where our code of conduct came from? You know why we have a code of conduct? It's like the Ten Commandments, right? Why do we have a Ten Commandments? Or in whatever church you belong to, there's some kind of list of rules. Our list of rules comes from where? Do you know? Our mission statement. You know what our mission statement is? One sentence. To educate individuals to think and act as ethical leaders and responsible citizens in a global community. I can't think of a better way to do that than to be in a foreign country and act that out. So the code of conduct, this long thing that you've probably seen on the website, is basically consistent with that, is trying to remind you of how to make choices to be an ethical, responsible citizen, which fits right in with paying attention, which being a considerate guest. And the third one I want to mention is listening. And listen and pay attention seem to be similar in some ways, but listen to where you're going. Do not shut it out with distractions. Focus on the food, the culture, the language, because that's going to be helpful to you in terms of moving through that and making it yours. We expect you to act the same way in Italy, Spain, Guatemala, wherever you're going there. Well, if you're misbehaving here, we don't want you to act that way there. I was going to say, I'm sure there's no misbehaviors in this room, but I've met a couple, or just a couple on campus. And we would hope that you would respond that same way there. Because we're not going to reach over there and say, remind you on a regular basis, but we have the same expectations, just like Tiara said. We have the same expectations of you abroad as we do here. Alcohol is, the reason that's front and center is because of after a female has more than 3 and a male has more than 4, the prefrontal cortex goes offline and we make really stupid decisions, basically. And we tend to get ourselves in trouble and then stuff happens. So that's one of the reasons why I think we're doing this front and center with that. Questions? Old news, right? Old news. But it's really important you think about it differently in terms of how it pertains to you. Don't do this for me. I'll be fine. Do it for you. Because you'll feel better, and also the old cliche is you're representing TCU. Well, it's an old cliche because it's true. You're representing TCU, you're representing study abroad, your friends, your family, etc. Keep that in mind, but it's probably more important to do it for you. Pay attention, be a considerate guest. Enough said. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to go through a few more things, answer a few more of your questions, and move you on out of here. The other piece that's in your zippered pouch is your International SOS card. Now, I hope that you remember, again, some time ago when you did your study abroad application, what International SOS is. But just to take a moment to refresh your memory, International SOS is our service agency that is available to help you with any type of health, safety, travel advice, emergency situation that you have. Keep the card with you, download the app on your phone, put the telephone number into your smartphone so you have it available, and call them for anything that you have a concern or a question about. They will help you if you're feeling ill and you don't know where to find the closest doctor. If you did a great job and planned and took all of your medication and had it stolen the minute you arrived, which I've had happen, call them. They'll help you replace your medicine. If you're lost and don't know what to do, if you're concerned about a safety issue, call them. They are available to help. It's not like calling 911. They are not an emergency response system, right? If you have a life-threatening situation, you need to call the local authorities. So you need to make sure you know what that number is. But if you need advice about what to do in a situation, where to go, how to find your way, etc., give them a call for those kinds of things. So you've got that card there. So let me talk through a couple of last things. Terrorism was something that was brought up, and I'm sure is on many people's minds after yesterday's very sad attacks in Brussels. And unfortunately, this is something that we are growing accustomed to in this world. We recognize, I think you recognize, that these things happen anywhere these days. They can just as easily happen here as anywhere in the world. And so our best advice to you is to enjoy your life and to carry on and do the things that you would do anyway, and at the same time to be cognizant and careful and vigilant and aware. We monitor the State Department advice. If we know of anything or hear anything, of course, we're going to let you know. The reality is, of course, that no one has a handle on where these things are happening, and it is kind of a frightening place to be. And yet, at the same time, we think the best thing is just to continue enjoying, exploring, being a part of the cultures and the communities that you want to visit with your study abroad. We ask that if you travel outside your host city, you let your professor know. So if you're going on a side trip over the weekend, if your study abroad is in London and you decide you want to go to Paris for the weekend, please let your faculty member know, so that in the really unfortunate scenario where we need to double check and confirm where everyone is, we know what city you are in. So please do let us know, let your professor know of any travel plans outside of your city. As much as possible, try to blend in with locals, try to keep a low profile, try to stay out of big groups, big crowds. We recognize that that is in many cases the very reason that you're going, is to see things that are touristy and to see things that attract lots of people, and yet we know that's where terrorists like to strike. And so we just encourage you to be really vigilant and to keep your eyes on what's going on, and careful of those things. The reality is, our biggest safety concern is overuse of alcohol, misuse of alcohol. It is the quickest way to ruin your experience. It's the quickest way for you to land in jail, which we have had happen. It's the quickest way for you to be dismissed from the program and sent home at your own expense. And you don't want that. Your parents don't want that. That's not why you're signing up for this experience. So that really is our number one concern. Our second concern is pickpocketing and petty theft. And so do keep your belongings safe. If as much as possible, separate some of your belongings, which is the other reason for this great little pouch. Keep a 20-pound or 20 euro or whatever note in this. Keep it separate from the rest of your things. Keep an emergency credit card in this that's separate from your things, so that if your wallet is stolen, you've got a backup for a little while. Keep your telephone and address of the place where you're staying in this. Just use this as sort of your emergency backup to avoid panic, so to speak. This is your place you can go to for your backup if your wallet's stolen, your phone is stolen, those kinds of things. We recommend that you do not use Uber, but that you only use licensed cabs in the places, in the cities that you're going to. Let me think if I have any, see if there's any others. And as we've sort of reiterated again and again here, even though you're going to places that are tourist sites, this doesn't mean that these places are built for your pleasure. You're not going to Disneyland where the people are at your beck and call to be your service providers. This is about you taking part in their life and enjoying their offerings and becoming accustomed to and acculturated to what they have to offer. So I did promise that I'd kind of keep you on track, so I'm not going to see if there's anything else I want. For the weekend, air conditioning. What questions do you have for me before I let you go? On health, safety, conduct, travel. I do want to point out again that I didn't read to you from the handout because you are all college students who can read yourself. So please do look at the handout in your own time. And in particular, the disciplinary procedures and the dismissal process. You have agreed to this when you signed all of your forms that if you behave poorly and make bad choices, we'll dismiss you from the program at a cost of $2,500. We'll bill that to you, we'll put you on a plane and send you home. And so we'll know that you've signed that, and that's not what we want. But again, as I said, I really wanted this to be a positive message and a positive experience because we're so excited that you're choosing to go. We know it's just going to be a great experience. We have to go through some of the negatives to ensure that we really have a positive experience for you and that you have the best, safest, healthiest, most pleasurable kind of experience that you can. And so that's really was what we wanted you to hear today. So I thank you for your time and attention. I hope you have a great experience.